Hello music people! In this video I'm going to be talking about non-chord tones, and this is an important topic to learn when you are learning how to place chords with a melody. And when you're first learning about placing chords with a melody, it's easiest to work with a melody like this first one here. Here I have a melody written in the treble clef, I've got chords written on top, and I have the notes of each chord written down in the bass clef underneath. And this is a kind of melody where it's possible to place chords with it in such a way so that all the notes of the melody match with the chord that's accompanying it. Let me play it for you and I think you'll hear what I mean. So let's go through one chord at a time. Here I'm playing the C major chord, and while the C major chord is happening, I have C, E, G, and E in the melody. Well, all of those notes belong with the C major chord. So those are all chord tones. And that is true for this entire excerpt. There are no non-chord tones in this melody. They're all chord tones. Take a look. Here I've got the F chord, and it makes a lot of sense to put the F chord here because I have F, A, and F. All those notes belong in the F major chord. Same here with the G chord. G, B, and D. I just have D here again. G, B, and D. Those are the notes of the G major chord. And with C at the end. The notes in the C major chord are down here, just to remind you. C, E, and G. So I've got C, E, and C in the melody. So those are all just chord tones. The reality is, though, most melodies are not nice and neat like this, where they're all chord tones. Most melodies contain a combination of chord tones and non-chord tones. And in fact, I find that melodies that only contain chord tones don't even really sound that good. And so I've got a different melody here. It's similar to the first melody that I played for you. It's the same rhythm, it uses the same chords, it's a similar shape, but it has some non-chord tones in it. And so let me play that for you. Okay, so what you're going to find is that with simple melodies like this first one, the only thing that you really have to consider are the pitches in the melody line. What notes of the melody are there. And then it becomes just really clear what chord you should put in it, or what your options are for different chords. And you only really have to look at one piece of criteria: what notes are in the melody. Once you start introducing non-chord tones, you need to start thinking of some different criteria. And something that's going to help you is if you can recognize non-chord tones when you see them. And in fact, there are different names for non-chord tones, and you don't have to necessarily memorize all of the names for the non-chord tones. You can if you want to, but you're not going to be tested on it. I just more want you to be able to recognize them when you see them, so that it helps you when placing chords with a melody. So let's take a look at this first 2-beat section here. We've got the C chord, and we have C, D, E, and C. Okay, well, I know that C and E are part of the C major chord, but D is not part of the C major chord, so that's a non-chord tone. And this type of non-chord tone is called a passing tone, or a passing note. And the reason it's called a passing note is because the melody is going upwards from C up to E. Those are both chord tones, and on its way up, it's playing this note in passing, so it's called a passing note. Now let's take a look at the F major chord. So here I have a non-chord tone also, G. G does not belong in the F chord. Obviously, F belongs in the F major chord, but G does not. This type of non-chord tone is called a neighbor note. A neighbor note is a non-chord tone that just kind of goes one step up or one step down from a chord tone, and then the melody just falls right back to that original chord tone. So in this case, it goes up a step and then right back down a step to the original note that you had that was a chord tone. All right. So in this bar, you can simply look at the notes and figure out that, okay, well, the majority of the notes in this part of the bar belong with the C chord. 3 out of 4, right? 1, 2, 3 of these notes. 3 out of 4 belong to the C major chord, so C major makes sense. Here you've got 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 of the notes in this part of the bar belong with the F chord, so we know that the F major chord works. Gets a little bit complicated here. Take a listen to this excerpt, just this part here where the G chord is being played. Okay, so let's just look at the pitches themselves. We've got D, E, F, and D. So D is part of the G major chord, but E and F are not. So that means that we've got 2 out of 4 notes are chord tones, and the other 2 are non-chord tones. So how do we know that G is working here? How do we know it's G? Why are these chord tones instead of non-chord tones? Well, we have to start to introduce some other kinds of criteria. So the second piece of criteria I want to talk to you about when you're deciding which chord to match with the melody is you should think about where the pitches are falling in terms of strong and weak beats. So this note falls on beat 1, this note falls on beat 2, and let me consider the whole bar for a minute. This note falls on beat 3, this note falls on beat 4. So beat 1 is usually considered to be the strongest beat of the whole measure. Beat 3 is considered to be a strong beat as well, but not as strong as beat 1. Then beat 2 is considered a weaker beat. Week 4 is considered a weaker beat still, even weaker than beat 2. So in terms of the strength of beats, it goes in order from strongest to weakest. It goes from beat 1, beat 3, beat 2, and beat 4. And any notes that go in between, those downbeats of a bar, so like an eighth note like this one or this one, this note falls in between beats 2 and 3, so that one's considered even weaker yet. So if you consider that this note is falling on the strongest beat of the whole bar, then usually you will want to make sure that this is a chord tone because it's falling on a strong beat. And we know that D is part of the G major chord, so it is that should be a chord tone. And D is repeated here too, so that just adds to our argument that D should be a chord tone, and G works well for that reason. Now let's take a look just at the last part of the second measure here. We've got C, B, and C. So 2 out of 3 of these notes in the melody belong with the C chord, so we know that the C chord makes sense for that reason. This is another example of a neighbor note. In this case, we've got a chord tone. The melody drops one step below a chord tone, goes right back up to a chord tone again. So that's another neighbor note. Now let's take a look at another melody that is a little bit more complicated. Has the same chords again. Has definitely a very similar melodic shape, but there's a few more notes, and it requires us to use another piece of criteria that I want to share with you. Take a look. All right, so First of all, we have C, C, D, and E. Okay, so if we use the pieces of criteria that we know so far, it makes sense to have C be the chord to accompany this. You know, most of the notes of this melody belong with the C chord, C, C, and E. There's only one note that does not belong with the C chord. This is our passing note here, and it is falling on a weak beat. There's a C that falls on the strongest beat of the measure here. Beat 2 is obviously not as strong as beat 1, but it's definitely stronger than this beat here. So for both those reasons, it makes sense to have the C chord here. Then we've got F, the F chord. We've got the F note falling on a strong beat, beat 3. This note falls right on beat 4. Then we have another F, so we've got 3 Fs versus 1 G. The majority of the notes are chord tones belonging to the F chord. G is just a quick little neighbor tone there that's falling on a very weak beat. It's just a 16th note beat. So again, for both those reasons, both those criteria being considered, we know that this melody works really well with the F chord. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated on the G chord. Take a listen. Let's say we just look at the pitches themselves. We've got D, E, F, E, and D. 5 notes in the melody. 3 out of 5 do not belong to the G chord. So how do I know that the G chord is the right one to use when most of the notes actually do not belong with the G chord? Well, the other piece of criteria that we've learned about so far is where the notes fall in terms of the strong beats and weak beats. So I've got this note here falling on beat 1, which is the strongest beat of the whole measure, right? And then I've got this note here, D again, a chord tone, but that's just falling on an 8th note beat. That's still a pretty weak beat. So, am I really sure that G is the best chord to go here? Well, there's a third piece of criteria that really confirms that choice, and that is the duration of the notes, how long the notes are being held for. So let's take a look. This D chord, this D note is falling on beat 1, and I'm holding it for a dotted 8th note. This D is being held for an 8th note. These 3 notes here, E, F, and E, those are just quick little 16th notes that are happening, okay? So they're happening on beats that, aren't super strong, and they're happening very quickly. These notes are being held for a longer duration, each of them. So that, really firms up my choice that I know that G is a good choice. So 3 criteria to consider when deciding to go with the G chord here. I'm looking at the pitches themselves. I'm looking at where the pitches are falling in terms of strong beats and weak beats. And I'm also considering the duration of each of the pitches. And at the end here, let's take a look. I've got my C chord. There's my chord tone. There's a chord tone. There's a chord tone. So 3 out of 5 notes belong with the C chord. There's just a couple different neighbor notes here, and this C falls on a pretty strong beat, beat 3. This one falls on beat 4, which is weaker than beat 3, but is definitely stronger than these little 16th note beats. And let's take a look at the duration. I mean, we've got 4 16th notes here, but then we've got this note that's held for a full quarter note beat, and that is a chord tone. So it makes sense to make sure that we pick a chord where this note is a chord tone. Now let me show you another concept by taking a look at this melody here. Let's hear how it sounds. So this is the same melody as up here, but I have done something called reharmonizing. I have reharmonized this melody. I've made it so that the chords are changing every beat. I've actually kept the same chords up here. I still have C, F, G, and C, but now I've just added chords in between. And it works because E and C, those notes also belong to the A minor chord. So A minor works there. The F note, it belongs in the F chord, but it also belongs to the D minor chord. So the F note works. Look at these two notes here, F and D. Those notes both belong to the B diminished chord, so I could put a quick B diminished chord here and it works. And what I've done here, I think is pretty interesting. I've actually got a very quick chord change, C to G and then back to C again. That B note here, that belongs with the G chord, so it actually does work for me to quickly change to a G chord just on that eighth note beat, right in between beats 3 and 4. Let's take another listen to it, and you can hear that it has a very different sound from what we've been hearing so far. So if you're wanting to make a creative choice to have your music sound maybe a little more traditional, like a little more classical, or maybe a little bit more hymn-like, or kind of choral sounding, like as if you're hearing a choir sing. This might be a good choice where you're having the chords change that much more often. It has a particular musical and stylistic effect. But generally, with pop-based music, it's fine to just have the chords change, once every 2 beats. Even just one chord per bar, is totally fine. Kind of depends on the tempo too. Maybe if you have a really slow tempo, it would work to have the chords change, every beat. But generally in pop music, chords changing, once every 2 beats is about as fast as you'd want to do it. Especially if you've got guitars playing along with it, which is so often the case. It's just kind of awkward for guitarists to change chords every beat. I mean, it's possible, but it doesn't even sound that good. It sounds better generally to have guitars, be able to play, one chord for a while, and they can really get into strumming a certain rhythm, on top of that chord change. So I just wanted to kind of make you aware that it might be an option to make chords happen more often to achieve a certain stylistic effect, but generally speaking, good idea to just have your chords change, once every 2 beats, not any faster than that. And the last piece of melody that I want to show you down here, it's again is based on some of the melodic ideas I've got up here, but it's a little different. Same chord changes as up here. I just want to show you 2 different types of non-chord tones that I haven't talked about yet. Take a listen. Okay, so I've got C, D, E, and F. Alright, so I've got the C chord with it. Basically, I have a passing note here, and then I have this note here. And this note is F, and it's coming just before I play the F chord. And when I play the F chord, this F note is held over and overlaps with when I play the F chord right on beat 3. So in a way, this note here is anticipating the chord that's coming up. And that is exactly what this note is called. This non-chord tone is called an anticipation. Because technically, I'm still playing this note while I'm on the C chord. So this is a non-chord tone. It's a non-chord tone that belongs to the chord that's being played, on the next beat. So it's an anticipation. It's anticipating, the chord that's about to be played. Now take a look here. I've got, I kind of do the reverse in this bar. Take another listen. So here I've got my G chord. D belongs with the G chord, and this D belongs with the G chord. But I end up holding this D, and it overlaps with this beat where I change to a C chord. Well, this note does not belong with the C chord, right? This D does not belong in the C chord. It's still kind of left over from when I played the G chord. I'm sort of suspending this chord tone into the next beat, which is a C chord. So that's what it's called. It's called a suspension. This note here, this note is called a suspension. It's a non-chord tone. It doesn't belong with the C chord. It's left over or suspended from back when I was playing a G chord. So it's called a suspension. So two different kinds of non-chord tones there that I didn't use before. An anticipation, and sort of the opposite of anticipation is a suspension. All right, so hopefully this video has been helpful. I talked about passing notes, neighbor notes, anticipations, and suspensions. I talked about 3 different criteria that you can use when deciding what chords to place with the melody. You can look at the pitches themselves. You can look at where those pitches fall in relation to the strong beats and weak beats of the bar. And you can also look at the duration of those pitches. So, all 3 of those criteria you can use when deciding which chords to place with the melody. So, I hope this video has been helpful, and I will see you next time.